Hey guys, Brian Kelly from Zombie Guitar here. Here in today's video, I want to talk about to mode or not to mode. So anytime you have a chord progression that you're going to solo over, you always have the option to either think in terms of modes or just ignore modes completely. And usually what I recommend for the majority of people is to focus on the second one and just ignore modes completely. The reason I say this is because in the guitar community, people tend to jump into this whole modes thing a bit too early. Now, this is just my opinion, but I think that if you don't know what a key is, or if you can't look at a chord progression and say, that's in the key of G major, then modes may be a bit above your pay grade. Or if you look at a chord progression and you can say, all right, that chord progression is in the key of G major, but you can't identify which chords are considered outside. If you can't do that, then I would also say that modes may be a bit above your pay grade. So that's the thing. People tend to dive into these modes a bit too early before understanding what I would consider to be the fundamentals, which is to just understand what it means to be in key or not in key. And then also to just be able to keep up with the chord changes by chord tone targeting. That's what I would consider to be fundamental stuff. Once you have the fundamental stuff down, then dive into modes. That's the order that I would suggest doing it in. So with that said, in this video, we're going to analyze a chord progression. It's a 4-chord chord progression. It's the chord progression from the song Creep by Radiohead. It's a G major chord, followed by a B major chord, followed by a C major chord, followed by a C minor chord. And we're going to look at a few different ways to solo over this chord progression. We're going to look at how we would approach soloing over that chord progression by not thinking about modes at all. Assuming you don't know a single thing about modes, how would we approach soloing over this chord progression? And then we're going to look at it from a modal perspective. All right, so first things first, we want to identify the key. You have 12 possible keys for which this can be in. Let's identify which of the 12 it is. So there's a G major chord, there's a B major chord, there's a C major chord, and there's a C minor chord. So the fact that there's a C major and a C minor chord going on there, something is going to be considered outside because you can't have a major and a minor chord both with the same root in the same key. Something has to be outside. So just assuming I really didn't know much, I would assume that this is in the key of G major because it's starting on the G major chord, right? So we could go to the circle of fifths and we could look at the chords that are surrounding the G major and we can look and see, okay, there's a G major in there, there's a C major in there, there's a B minor in there. All right, so the G's in there, the B's in there, the C's in there. All right, we can assume that this is in the key of G major. So by making this assumption, we would then be able to identify which chords are in key and which chords are out of key. So the G major is in key, the C major is in key, the C minor is out of key, and then the B major is out of key. So just as an experiment, I just want to play 100% in this key just before I start to add the variants in, which are these out of key chords. So I'm just going to take everything and make it in key. So the G major chord is going to be part of the key. I'm going to take the B major chord, I'm going to make that into a B minor chord because then that would be 100% in the key. And then that C minor at the end, I'm going to turn that into a C major. All right, so as you can see, just noodling in that G major scale up and down, the chord progression, everything worked. All the chords were part of the key of G major. The scale was correct. The chords were correct. Everything connected together. I was just kind of playing in this little 5-fret area right here in pentatonic position number 1 for this key. But that's what scale noodling in the correct key over a chord progression that is also in the same key. That's how that stuff all fits together. All right, so let's now try doing the exact same thing, but this time we're going to use the actual chord progression. All right, so that sounded pretty good again, right? Like we're still playing in the correct key. I used the G major scale. I was just running up and down the G major scale. That's the key scale for the key of G major. It sounded pretty good, right? I'm playing in key with the music. We can make it sound better though. And we can do so by chord tone targeting. So the two chords that I really want to apply this chord tone targeting to are going to be the two out of key chords that are happening here. That would be the B major chord and the C minor chord. Now, of course, you can chord tone target for every single chord, and you should. I mean, that's really how you emphasize the underlying chords. You focus on the notes that make up the chord as you're soloing. But just for the purpose of this lesson, just for the purpose of really bringing out these two out of key chords, because they're out of key, so we kind of want to highlight the fact that they are in fact out of key, we're going to chord tone target those chords. So looking at the notes that make up a B major chord, it's B, D sharp, F sharp. So the one note that makes that chord out of key is the note D sharp. You could also call that the note E flat. We're going to call it by its sharp name because the key of G major, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. G major is a key that goes by its sharp names. It's on the right side of the circle of fifths. So we're going to call the three notes that make up a B major chord B, D sharp, F sharp. The B's in key, the F sharp's in key. It's the D sharp that causes that chord to be considered out of key. So that's going to be the note that we're really going to emphasize when that chord is occurring. For the C minor chord, the notes that make up a C minor chord are C, E flat, and G. Instead of calling it E flat, we're going to call it D sharp because we're going by our sharp names because we're in a key that uses sharp names. So again, when that C minor chord is occurring, we're going to focus on that one note, that E flat note or that D sharp note. It's the same note because that is the note that causes the C minor chord to be out of key. So you can see that that one note really highlighted the chord in both instances. When that note was played over the B major chord, it really emphasized the fact that that B major chord, something special is going on with it. That's what out of key is. So we did that over the B chord, we did that over the C minor chord, it was the same note. And then the second time around in the demo, I took things a step further and then I just played the arpeggios of each of the chords. But again, the thing that makes the B major chord out of key is just one single note. The thing that makes the C minor chord out of key is just one single note. Coincidentally, it happens to be the same one note for both of those chords. But yeah, you could play the full arpeggios over these chords, or you could just emphasize that one note. Either way, it's going to bring out that chord. And that's the whole point of this chord tone targeting. That's the whole point of playing arpeggios. You're highlighting the underlying chords that you're soloing over as opposed to just thinking in terms of the key. Now we're going to take the modal approach. All right, so the modal approach is where you think one scale per chord. We have 4 chords, so we're going to be playing 4 different scales. As you can hear, all of the scales that I chose to play over each of those chords sounded very connected with the underlying chord. That's because I was choosing the correct scale. The correct scale is going to be arguable. You know, some people may have a different opinion of what the correct scale is. But theoretically, and going by the math and just looking at like, okay, the theory dictates that that's the correct scale. G Ionian, B Phrygian dominant, C Lydian, and then C Dorian theoretically would be the correct scales to play, and you can hear that they all sounded very nicely over each one of those chords. Now, could I take that exact same 4 scale concept and do the exact same thing right here? Absolutely, 100%. The only reason I jumped from here to here to here to here was just to demonstrate the concept, just to demonstrate, okay, well, here's the G, so I'll have my first finger being placed there. There's the B, so I'll have my first finger being placed there. There's the C, so I'll have my first finger being placed there. But of course, you can confine it all to one area. I could play the G Ionian, aka the G major scale right here. I could play the B Phrygian dominant scale right here, just starting on the B. I could play the C Lydian scale right here, start on the C. I could play C Dorian right here, again starting on the C. Alright, so I could still take the 4 scale approach and just confine everything right to here if I want as well. I don't have to jump from here to here to here. I'm just showing you the different thought approaches here. But you really can get a lot accomplished just by thinking in terms of what key am I playing in and what chords am I soloing over. Whatever chords I'm soloing over, which ones are out of key and which ones are in key. Just knowing that information and then just sticking to the whole chord tone targeting thing, you can really get a lot done without thinking in terms of modes. But if you want to think in terms of modes, there's that option too. And then the last thing I want to say in this video, and this is something that I stress all the time and it's super helpful, is to think in terms of chord function as opposed to actual chord names. So instead of calling this a G major to a B major to a C major to a C minor chord progression, instead call it a 1, major 3, 4, minor 4 chord progression. This stuff is going to come up all the time. You're going to see instances where there's a 1 chord and then it's followed by a major 3 chord. Just knowing that that major 3 chord is out of key and just being used to dealing with that, knowing that your pentatonic position number 1 for whatever key you're playing in, that one note just happens to be right there or right there or right there. That's the one note that causes that major 3 chord to be out of key. It doesn't matter what key you're in. I could be in the key of C major. I could play a C major to an E major to an F major to an F minor. It's the same chord progression. I'm in the key of C major now. My pentatonic position number 1 is right here. Anytime that E major chord comes along, I know I can just go. There's that out of key note. It's outside of that pentatonic position number 1 by 1 fret towards the direction of the headstock. How do I know that? I know it's because it's a major 3 chord. I know what to do over a major 3 chord. We get to the F major chord, that's in key. The F minor chord, that's out of key. That's very common. That's called a minor plagal cadence when they do this. So you hear that minor 4 chord come along. Again, you know, okay, well, here's my pentatonic position 1. But that minor 4 chord comes along, oh, slide out of pentatonic position number 1 by 1 fret. There's that note that makes that minor 4 chord out of key. But yeah, always think in terms of chord function. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Why is it going to make your life a lot easier? Because you have 12 keys. You study one single key. You get really good at just one single key. You learn all the patterns on the fretboard for that one single key. You learn what to do over a 1 chord. You learn what to do over a 2 chord. You learn what to do over a 3 chord. What to do over a major 3 chord. Do it all in that one single key, and then another key comes along and you're playing in, you're like, oh wow, I've seen all this stuff before. Everything's just kind of shifted. Now my pentatonic position 1's here, but I still know what to do over a 1 chord, a 2 chord, a 3 chord, a 4 chord, blah blah. Know your chord function. It's very important. Anyway, so that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. See you next time.